Radio and online. We've got a massive show for you today with loads of top stories.
Absolutely. Well, make sure they get in touch with your views as usual. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We're getting through all of those throughout the programme, but first, here's the latest news.
I've got my earpiece off at some point as well.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says Russia's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine is directly threatening the safety of all of Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, the largest in Europe, caught fire after it was attacked by Russian forces overnight. The blaze has since been put out. Downing Street has called the situation gravely concerning. Boris Johnson's vowed to seek an emergency UN Security Council meeting in a bid for a ceasefire. Earlier, Ukrainian authorities confirmed Russia has now taken control of the power plant. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the Kremlin of nuclear terror.
If there is a nuclear explosion, this will be the end of everybody, the end of Europe. This will mean the evacuation of the whole of Europe. Only immediate action from Europe can stop the Russian troops. Don't let Europe die in a nuclear catastrophe.
Well, speaking at the organisation's headquarters in Vienna, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, says there were no radiation leaks.
It's important to say that all the safety systems of the 6 reactors at the plant were not affected at all, and that there has been no release of radioactive material. The systems we have to measure the radiation are fully functional as well.
The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine. That as an intensive day of diplomacy begins in Europe. Liz Truss will attend a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the NATO alliance is resolute in its support of Ukraine.
Every ally, in one way or another, is coming to Ukraine's assistance. Every ally, in one way or another, is helping to strengthen NATO itself. And as the Secretary General said, ours is a defensive alliance. We seek no conflict. But if conflict comes to us, we're ready for it. And we will defend every inch of NATO territory.
Antony Blinken there. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO's a defensive alliance and warns it won't hesitate to defend its borders.
Russia has shattered peace on the European continent. It has engaged in a war of a scale of a type not seen in Europe since the Second World War.
Well, earlier, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said Vladimir Putin's at risk of ending up in prison for alleged war crimes carried out by his Russian forces in Ukraine. Vadim Ivchenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament, says the country's government is collating evidence.
Mariupol and Kherson, Russian troops tried just to cut down from the map, just to destroy everything in these cities. Yeah. They're using the prohibited missile. They're using bombs for the civilians. We're gathering all the information, all the videos, and of course, we'll ask the criminal court just to start investigation.
Meanwhile, authorities in the southern Ukrainian city of Mariupol say it remains under constant attack and residential areas are being shelled. The UK's Defence Ministry says Russian forces have likely encircled the city and around 500,000 people are believed to be without running water or electricity. That as residents and volunteers in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, are creating metal anti-tank barriers known as hedgehogs in a bid to slow Russia's advances. Yulia Gritsenko, one of the many forced to flee the capital, says Ukrainians are fighting for Europe's future.
I'm really proud of all my people, of all Ukrainians who are now fighting for our freedom, for our right to live in a democratic country, to protect Europe from the global war which is happening right now in my country. And I just hope that my child will grow up here in Ukraine, and we will be free from.
The Home Secretary is visiting Poland later to meet Ukrainians seeking to flee to the UK. Priti Patel is expected to launch the Ukraine Family Scheme, allowing Brits and those settled in the UK to bring their relatives over to join them. We'll be bringing you the latest as we get it. In other news, Paulette Hamilton has won the Birmingham Erdington by-election, holding the Labour seat. A nurse of 25 years, Ms Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency. In her victory speech, she expressed her admiration for the work done by her predecessor, Jack Dromey, who died in January.
First, I would like to pay tribute to Jack Dromey. He was a wonderful MP for his constituency. I have heard so many stories of the difference Jack made to the people's lives. That is the kind of MP I aspire to be.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick and Anaya and to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Inman. I'm Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio. We've got a great show lined up for you to kickstart your day, so here's what's on the menu.
Yeah, well, the PM says all of Europe is threatened by Putin's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine as Boris Johnson calls for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. We're asking you, can the West stop Putin?
Meanwhile, Paulette Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency after winning the Erdington by-election. We'll break down the results and what this means for the Labour Party.
Yes, and the Scottish Government is making it easier and indeed quicker to change one's gender. But we'll explain why this bill is being met with fierce opposition.
We have all of that coming up across the programme and much more, so make sure to get in touch with your views, GB Views, at gbnews.uk.
Yes, morning everyone. Right, so Ukrainian authorities say that Russian forces have seized the largest nuclear plant in Europe. A fire broke out at the place that I can't pronounce, nuclear power complex, in southeastern Ukraine earlier this morning amid heavy shelling in the Russian area by forces. Yeah.
Yes, nuclear regulators and government bodies in Ukraine and the United States say radiation levels appear normal. Let's get the latest from our GB News security editor, Mark White. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Mark. There's been widespread condemnation of the attack on the nuclear power plant. They surely weren't deliberately trying to target the reactors, were they?
Well, it would be madness if they were, because they would be the first to suffer if there was a nuclear meltdown at that plant, and the radiation cloud would probably hit them before it hit the rest of Europe. This is the Zaporizhzhia plant, which is in the south of Ukraine. It's about 50 miles south of the city of Dnipro, where there has been fierce fighting around that city of late as Russian forces try to close in. Now, it's likely that they're trying to seize the plant with a view to perhaps switching off the power supplies. It controls about a quarter of the electricity supplies to Ukraine. So a huge plant, the biggest nuclear power station in Europe, and obviously the spectre of any kind of nuclear incident there is very concerning indeed. Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, spoke to President Zelensky overnight. He has promised that he will do all he can to try to ensure that the Russian authorities do not continue with the shelling of that area. We understand that now it is under Russian control. The big question was, of course, the staff there. They've stayed on, we think, according to the Independent Atomic Energy Agency, that they have stayed on and they are managing the reactors, because clearly if they flee, there's no one to manage the reactors. They can go into meltdown, and then you're looking at another Chernobyl.
Yeah, indeed. Now, obviously, as for elsewhere, the Russian advances, it seems like they're slowly but surely kind of encircling most of Ukraine's main cities. Is that right?
Yeah, this is straight out of the Russian playbook, really. We have been concerned about, Russian advances stalling, but if you look at the map of the region, it shows that Kharkiv up in the northeast, the second city in Ukraine, is completely surrounded now. The local authorities there say the conditions are horrific inside that city. They are coming under regular bombardment from artillery and missile strikes. Mariupol, again, a crucial seaport down on the Sea of Azov. It is now encircled. Similar reports, the gas, electricity, food supplies are all cut off and they're being shelled regularly. And then Kherson, we were hearing so much about this strategic port city just north of Crimea. It had fallen to Russia, it hadn't fallen to Russia, it was still in Ukrainian hands. It now seems that it has been taken over by Russian forces.
OK, yes, and obviously as well, what about this massive 40-mile-long Russian military convoy that we're seeing? What's the latest on that?
Well, that's a convoy that is heading slowly but surely down towards the capital, Kiev. It is 40 miles long, as you say. And the reason it's now so long, it was shorter than that, but you had vehicles that were 2 or 3 abreast. And they've decided to spread out because they were coming under attack. There's also logistical issues, we understand, according to the UK Ministry of Defence, who say that the fuel supplies, ammunition supplies, food supplies, all of that is not going the way that the Russian forces want. They're also facing fierce resistance from the Ukrainian military forces, and all of the while, as they try to work their way down towards the Ukrainian capital, key cities along the route are being the subject of fierce fighting. Chernihiv and also the city of Bodoryanka. Now, there are drone images from Bodoryanka that have been released just late yesterday. They are incredible images. I will describe them for our radio listeners, but they really give an indication of the kind of site, an illustration of what you saw in Aleppo. Tower blocks just obliterated, others still on fire, rubble-strewn streets, vehicles burnt out, including military vehicles as well. And this scene that we're witnessing here in Bodoryanka is being replicated in key centres of population right across Ukraine. As I say, it's taken from the military tactical handbook as far as the Russians are concerned. This is what they do. They encircle cities, they then bombard them, they starve the population, they pummel them into capitulation. And that looks like what is playing out here right across Ukraine.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, of course, our security editor. Right now, it's time for us to go to Thomas Jones. He's a British expat. He was still in Ukraine last time we spoke to him, actually. He joins us now, I believe, from Poland, I think. Thomas, thank you very much for joining us again. Good to see you again. How are you, first and foremost, and your family?
Good. I think the word you were looking for was Zaporizhia, which
yes, sorry. I thought I didn't want to butcher that. I think the situation is bad enough without me ruining that name, isn't it? But how are you anyway? Is everything okay?
I'm in Poland right now, heading slowly towards England. We were in a line, an incredible line at the border 3-4 days ago. We spent 38 hours in line. Had the possibility to walk, but I thought we should hang out in the line with other people and help people with children, and just be there for them. And I have the luxury of having an English passport, so I can go and come as I please. And also, it was a good thing for me to realise that we haven't got it so bad being British passport holders, that we have the freedom to move around, whereas other people don't. It was horrible seeing men take their children and families to the border, and then I see them coming back empty-handed. Heartbreaking, horrible stuff.
And Thomas, how did you get to Poland? What was the journey like?
The journey was, we drove from Lviv to the border, and we did several routes because main roads were blocked. We did, off-road, kind of muddy road routes to get to the main road towards the border. I damaged the car in the process, but not a problem. It was not an easy journey. as one would expect going to a border crossing, moving maybe 1 meter, 2 meters every hour. People trying to jump the queue, panic, children crying, people arguing, people blocking the road, fights breaking out. Not good at all.
No, surely not, actually, as well. Now, look, overnight, of course, we've heard about Putin essentially, I suppose, taking a nuclear facility. How do you guys feel about this? Is there genuine concern on the ground there that Putin might go nuclear, as far as you're concerned?
I think the step before nuclear would be the thermobaric bomb route, which is another, all weapons are nasty, but these are especially, weapons of mass destruction, turning oxygen into complete fire with a shockwave of fire. If he busts those out, then it's going to be serious. Would he go nuclear? We're seeing that he's not stopping at anything. He's like the thief that can't get into the house. If I can't have it, you can't have it.
Yeah.
Not looking good. Not looking good at all.
No, not at all. Now, obviously, you are in Poland. Now, is there a genuine concern, again, on the ground, just from what you're hearing from people around you, that he might not stop, frankly, once he's, well, if he gets Ukraine, maybe when he gets Ukraine, that he might go to Poland or to other places as well?
Well, that's the fear, The west of Ukraine, my region where I live, is right on the Polish border. And I'm sure any provocation from Ukraine, from the Ukrainian side, from Russians to Poland, it's going to have serious consequences. The sentiment here is, is that way could happen, and they want Europe to wake up. I think the President, Zelensky said, it's a European problem, and it's going to become that.
Yeah, no, indeed. So just to kind of humanise it a little bit, really, as well. I mean, not that it needs it, essentially, but so where are you actually staying now? Then, how what are you doing? What's your situation?
Well, basically, I've had to have money sent from England because I blocked all my cards just in case of card fraud, which has been going on apparently, hacking and things like that. So basically, I'm staying in a cheap hotel in Wrocław. I'll go to the Netherlands in the next couple of days to take my wife. Well, I'm with my wife and the dog. We'll go and stay with a friend of mine who has a Ukrainian wife there. My wife has kind of alienated herself from the whole situation, and I really do think she needs to kind of be around her people. So I'm going to take her there and we're going to relax for a moment. We're seeing her son at the moment, who is in Wrocław. He's studying here, so I thought it was a very good idea that instead of bypassing and going straight to England, that she see her son and spend some quality time with our son that we haven't seen him since September of last year. So it's a big mess.
It is, yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas Jones, British expat who was in Ukraine and is now in Poland. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, and good luck, of course, good luck. Anyway, so we're going to go to some of your views now, actually. The West should have stopped Putin on day one of this invasion. Now his forces are split into a number of areas in Ukraine. The task will be very difficult. That's from Ronald. Look, we were chatting before the show, weren't we, about where do we draw the line with Putin? I mean, I want to know how you feel about this, really, but I'm concerned that he might keep rolling the tanks in, and before you know it, he's got this huge, I mean, he already has a huge landmass, but, he's right on our doorstep, and then we act.
Well, the question always remains, really, is what does acting look like? I mean, we do know in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea, there wasn't as much pushback and call to act, and now it may have given him a sense that there would not be a pushback, and he's now gone and done this. But what does acting look like? We are now obviously giving weapons and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, taking in refugees and giving as much diplomatic and kind of financial support as we can. But we really have to grapple with that implication of what acting militarily really looks like. British soldiers potentially dying, fighting Russian troops, which is something that didn't even happen directly during the Cold War. So it would be fundamentally quite unprecedented. I
think that one of the big questions, really, that remains unanswered is whether or not Putin has actually just lost it, right? So if he has essentially gone mental, then, really, anything can happen, can't it? Anything could happen. It's a question of whether or not he's actually calculated, this is part of a plan, he's playing kind of human chess, as it were, or if he has lost it, then, frankly, we're bang in trouble, aren't we? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's really easy because within our society, when we have countries behaving in ways that we see as contradictory to how we would behave, that we might think that they've just lost the plot. But actually, I think that we have to really understand the motivations, interests and aims seriously of Putin and other authoritarian leaders if we are to really grapple with the kinds of behaviours that they're engaging with. I think it's easy for us to think, oh, they must have gone mad, but actually maybe their worldview, their logic is
very different.
On a very different plane.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, coming up, we'll be hearing about the results of the Birmingham Erdington by-election, so don't go away.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, good morning, everybody. It's 10:22. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Flowering Iman as well. We're on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, last night Labour held the seat of Erdington after a by-election that was triggered by the sudden death of MP Jack Dromey. The Labour Party had put forward NHS nurse of 25 years, Paulette Hamilton, who won with 55% of the vote and by a majority of 3,622 votes.
Yeah, she's also Birmingham's first black MP, apparently, and our Midlands reporter, Balvinda Sidhu, was in Erdington this morning.
So I was at the count last night and the results came in around 1 a.m. and as you just said, Labour have held on to this seat. I mean, it's been held by Labour for longer than before you and I were even born. That's how long Labour have kept this seat. It's been known as a so-called safe seat. Now, there was a little bit of tension throughout the night, a little bit of worry because of the low turnout that this may not work in Labour's favour, but they did hold on with a majority and they elected Paulette Hamilton, who has now become Birmingham's first ever black MP. There's lots of conversation about that, actually, that people were quite surprised that, you know, Birmingham doesn't have a black MP already, considering it is one of the most diverse cities in England. But Paulette Hamilton did win, and in her victory speech, she thanked the leader of the party, Sir Keir Starmer.
I will be your voice in Westminster and challenge this government to get a better deal for Erdington. But I'd also like to say a special thank you to Keir Starmer for his endless support. Even when my dad died, they were there, they wrapped me in cotton wool and they supported me.
Well, it's been a sort of turbulent campaign for Paulette. I mean, at the beginning, she lost her father, and then, you know, she's had, you know, quite a lot of support from the Labour Party, as she just mentioned there. But, you know, in the early days, they were quite confident that they would win this seat because of the Partygate scandal that's been going on at Westminster. But then a couple of days ago, controversial comments that she made in 2015 were unearthed by GBNews, and that did affect her campaign. And as she hit the headlines for those comments, you know, Labour came well behind her. They supported her and said that they do still think that she's the best person for the job, and that, you know, she was just talking about better representation for black people in public office. But it's likely that those comments will be discussed in the days to come, as some Tory MPs have written to Sir Keir Starmer asking him to question whether she is the right person for this job as MP here in Erdington. But of course, the people here have chosen Paulette Hamilton to be their next MP and to represent them. And they, you know, when I've been here on the road, you know, talking to people, they're desperate for somebody to regenerate their high street and help with the cost of living, because these are the real issues affecting people in these sorts of smaller areas in England, and that's what they want their next MP to be focusing on.
That was Bhavinder Sidhu, our Midlands reporter. Well, congratulations to this new MP. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure why she's a black MP, a black female MP. You know, I hope that she's there because of her merit and her contribution and credibility. I wouldn't want to, if I ended up ever being elected for whatever reason, known as a black MP.
I think it's the first, isn't it? I get what you're saying, but I think the reason why people are saying
it's not the first black MP ever.
No, in that area, isn't it?
I mean, but we've had, you know, several black MPs now.
Yes.
So I don't necessarily know if it has to be the defining point about that.
Do you think it is, though? Because actually Labour have done stuff like this before, haven't they? They've had all-women shortlists. Yeah.
Exactly.
Do you think that diminishes? Do you think that diminishes the actual purpose of becoming an MP?
I genuinely think it does, and I do think that it's horrible to be an ethnic minority person or a woman or an LGBT person and think that you may have got there for another reason, not just your contribution, your ability. So I think it contributes to that whole idea.
Yes, indeed. Well, here to discuss this result is Tony Diver, political correspondent at The Telegraph. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's just crack on, I suppose, with the initial matter at hand, I suppose. How do you feel? What do you read into this by-election result?
Well, I think this by-election tells us pretty much what the result says, doesn't it? Which is that it's a strong Labour seat. It was a strong Labour seat under Jack Dromey, who died earlier this year. But Labour's increased its share of the vote. The result shows us today that although the turnout was relatively low, and you would probably expect that in a by-election, people in this constituency are fundamentally Labour voters.
You say that you expect it, but is the low turnout surprising at all? Does that not indicate that, you know, voters are not particularly, you know, rallying and passionate to go out to vote right now?
Well, yes, it does, but that always happens during by-elections, because when you've got a general election campaign going on, it's in all the papers every day, it's on the news every night, it becomes a debate about who the party leaders are and who the next Prime Minister is going to be. That's something that really energises people and gets them to go out to vote on the day. There will be plenty of people in that constituency who didn't even realise that there was a by-election happening yesterday, whereas to not know that there was a general election going on is something quite different.
Yeah, let's just move it on now, really, and talk about Sir Gavin Williamson, of course. He's going to receive a knighthood for services to ruining children's education, I assume. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, this was an interesting announcement yesterday. I think perhaps one of the most interesting things about it is that it came just on a random day in March. I mean, usually when people are knighted or ennobled or given any sort of honours, we either get it on the Queen's birthday, Queen's official birthday in June, or we get it in the New Year's honours list. And what we learned yesterday was that he was given this honour for the New Year, but it had to be paused because there was a Partygate investigation going on into events in the Department of Education when he was Education Secretary. And then it was sort of randomly announced yesterday by Downing Street, who said that he's now a Sir. And I mean, there are plenty of people who are quite upset about this. Labour and the Lib Dems and various other educational campaigners came out yesterday and said that they thought he didn't really deserve one, and that a lot of those problems that we had during the pandemic with the exam system, getting young people their results, mean were actually his fault and he shouldn't be rewarded for it.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to be a running theme when there is an honours list. A lot of people do complain, but it does just seem to be dished out to anyone that was a minister, now? It doesn't really seem to be a clear criteria,
things, doesn't he? He's a chief whip. He knows. He's got all the secrets.
Yeah, that's one perspective. But I do think that it does seem, at least to the public, oftentimes that if you've just been a minister, that means that you are someone that can get on the honours list. It doesn't seem to always be relatively about your actual contribution anymore.
Yes, I suppose so. And I suppose the days of sort of ordering or giving out knighthoods to people for chivalry or battlefield service or whatever are now gone. And political parties have the opportunity, but the opposition does as well, but political parties have the opportunity to nominate people, and inevitably they choose people that they want to reward for whatever reason. So yes, you might argue that Gavin Williamson is being rewarded here for his services to the Conservative Party, not his services to the country. But that, as you say, that is an argument that is made every time these honours are handed out, and that is the way that the system works, rightly or wrongly.
Well, Tony, look, thank you very much for joining us. Tony Diver there, of course, political correspondent at The Telegraph. And, interesting, let us know what you think about this. Sir Gavin, arise, Sir Gavin. Would you turn down an honour? You strike me as the kind of person who might, for some reason, turn it down.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I'll decide if I get that lovely honour bestowed upon me. But I think, Gavin Williams, he did, he weathered the storm during the COVID-19 pandemic. He was arguing for the Free Speech and Academic Freedom Bill on university campuses. I mean, perhaps you can make the case. I do think there's an interesting point. Maybe it's on services to the Conservative Party.
Yes, I think it probably is. Anyway, after the break, the SNP updated the Gender Recognition Reform Bill yesterday to a somewhat controversial response, actually. We'll bring you the latest after these headlines.
It's 10:31. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says Russia's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine is directly threatening the safety of all of Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, the largest in Europe, caught fire after it was attacked by Russian forces overnight. The blaze has since been put out, and the head of the UN's atomic watchdog says there's been no release of radioactive material. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the Kremlin of nuclear terror.
If there is a nuclear explosion, this will be the end of everybody, the end of Europe. This will mean the evacuation of the whole of Europe. Only immediate action from Europe can stop the Russian troops. Don't let Europe die in a nuclear catastrophe.
Russian troops are now entering the city of Mykolaiv near the Black Sea between Odessa and Kherson. That's according to its mayor. Meanwhile, authorities in Mariupol, also in the south, say it remains under constant attack and residential areas are being shelled. The UK's Defence Ministry says Russian forces have likely encircled the city. That as residents and volunteers in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, are creating metal anti-tank barriers known as hedgehogs in a bid to slow Russia's advances. The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine. That as an intensive day of diplomacy begins in Europe. Liz Truss will attend a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. And in other news, Paulette Hamilton has won the Birmingham Erdington by-election, holding the Labour seat. A nurse of 25 years, Ms Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. To the Point with Patrick and Anaya is back in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 10:35 a.m. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin Iman, and Patrick Christys on your TV and on your radio this morning.
Yeah, well, the Scottish Government is bringing in new proposals to make changing one's gender easier and quicker. So one of the ways they're looking at doing this is by setting up a fast-tracked and, quote, less medicalised system. So trans people can change their gender without going through what the SNP call a degrading, traumatic and intrusive process with medical checks and wait periods and much more as well.
However, some campaigners have raised concerns about the SNP's gender recognition reform bill and are worried about the impact the proposed changes could have on women's rights. Well, Miranda Yardley is a human rights activist and joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us, Miranda. I mean, what do you make of the proposed reforms? I mean, the Equality and Human Rights Commission has cautioned the Scottish Government to look more into this, but they seem to be ignoring the calls from campaigners and actually the equality body in the country.
I think they're probably ignoring many of their own voters as well. It's quite amazing what single-party states will try these days. Yeah. I think the whole concept of self-ID is fundamentally flawed. The idea of women being able to define their own single-sex spaces is an idea that came about simply because women were prevented from participating in everyday life, in public life. And what this type of law seeks to do, it's fundamentally, it is against any ideas of equality and fairness and the dignity of women.
Yeah, well, look, one of the reasons apparently why the SNP are bringing this in, I'm just quoting now, is because trans people, as they say, are among the most stigmatised in our society. Is that true?
Is it heck? Don't be ridiculous. There are plenty of people more stigmatised than trans people.
Yeah, but
you
you're
want to see real stigmatisation? Go onto the internet and look at any of the women who write about this issue. And look at the amount of abuse hurled at them, the stigma that they suffer for speaking out. Look at what's happened to J.K. Rowling, a woman who is this country's most successful author. Also, an incredibly generous woman who's gone out of her way to support people who are less fortunate than herself. You want to see the way that she is being stigmatised.
Well, she's been stigmatised by her own cast members. She's turned these bang-average actors into multi-millionaires. Daniel Radcliffe would be stacking shelves in Lidl if it wasn't for J.K. Rowling, and now all of a sudden he's disowned her. But anyway, I believe you have a question.
Miranda, why do you identify as transsexual rather than transgender? Because I remember, when I was younger, that was the term that people used to describe people that felt differently to their biological sex, but now transgender is the one that is more widely used.
Wow, there's a whole rabbit hole.
Here we go. We've got another hour and a half left on the programme, so crack on.
Fantastic. Well, there you go. The next hour, in fact, we could probably make a 7-part series out of this. I think people kind of, if we go back, I think people have an idea about what transsexual means, and the idea was introduced in has been introduced in a number of documentaries. There was a documentary about Julia Grant in the 70s called A Change of Sex. And what we saw there was an individual who was being put through a process of counselling. Of course, Julia decided not to go through with the process that was there, but there was a process that people followed. And you went through this idea that what you would do is you would undertake a fairly significant amount of psychological support, and you would go through that process over what really was a number of years.
Yeah, just quickly on that, because you just said going through a bunch of psychiatric examination and things like that, and Nicola Sturgeon has described this as
counselling,
as intrusive. I mean, do you think that that's important? Because I think that that is quite important to make sure that people are making the right decision. I mean, that they potentially could be going through, life-changing bodily transformation. Isn't it right that we do psychological and ask really tough questions of people to make sure that they're making the right choice, whereas S&P want to get rid of that process?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure there are no bad actors as well.
Yeah.
I think if anyone's going to go through this process, then their mental health has got to be in order. There was a statement made by one of the Scottish parliamentarians yesterday suggesting that no one has ever pretended to be a woman to get into women's spaces or take advantage of women, which is a patently, obviously untrue statement. And it really worries me that this whole idea of self-ID is being pushed around so that any man can define themselves as a woman. Here we go again, the same sort of thing
Miranda,
with men defining what women...
Do you believe that you can change sex? I mean, because for a lot of people, it's very simple. You have one reproductive function and another is we have a species that's male and female. But some people are trying to really tell people that you can change your sex. I mean, do you think that this is actually possible, or are we just not being honest with ourselves as society?
Oh, we're not being honest with ourselves as society. It's impossible to change sex. We are a sexually dimorphic species. It's how we've evolved. It's how mammals evolve. And what we do is we evolve as a sexually dimorphic species to make sure that the species survives. The whole concept of changing sex is
Miranda, what do we do then? Because this debate has been raging on for seemingly years now. Yeah. It's a back and forth with the S&P, the British government, and there seems to be these two worldviews. You've got one hand, the J.K. Rowling and other radical feminists, and a lot of other people who say...
Feminists?
Who say, sex is immutable, you can't change sex, we need to protect single-sex spaces. And the other side is self-identification, it's all, a social construct. How do we meet those two worldviews when it comes to legislation, then?
That's an interesting question. Well, I think legislation should be based upon measurable empirical evidence and reality. I think basing legislation on the activities of lobbyists, especially abusive lobbyists, is an absolutely terrible idea and a terrible thing to do. I think that as well, that if within this debate we get discussions about diversity and about equality and about respecting other people, and what I see in this is a complete absence of any respect for or any consideration being given to the safety and dignity of women and the privacy that women are entitled to be able to get away from men. And it doesn't just, we need to think about how this is going to affect all types of women, how this is going to affect young girls in schools, how this is going to affect, young girls who are athletes, who want to get involved in sport. We need to look at, we need to see the effect that this has on the most vulnerable women there who are in women's shelters and, spaces to protect them from those who fled domestic violence, those who've been victims of rape. And when we have this really quite perverse situation in Scotland, surprisingly, where I think it's Edinburgh rape crisis is headed by a man who now calls himself a woman, who got the job by lying about his sex in the application process. And to me, the individual's called Myrtle Wadwa. It seems to me the most repulsive type of insult to women to do that and keep somebody in that type of position who has lied about such a fundamental thing about themselves.
Well, it's classic, isn't it? It's just sort of nothing surprises me anymore. Miranda, can I just ask you something, right? I've actually interviewed you now several times, OK? And you know what? It struck me. I at no point have bothered to ask you about your own experience, right? So I thought, can I? So sorry about that. That shows the kind of person I am, I think. But can you tell me a bit about it? Because this particular thing that's happening in Scotland now, for example, would that have been a benefit to you at all in your lived? I know it's not quite the same thing, but don't get me wrong. But would it have been any benefit to you whatsoever?
I think the whole process is of absolutely no benefit to anybody. We still have this law in the UK called the Gender Recognition Act, which the country was made to implement by the European Court of Human Rights back in 2003, 2004. The existence of the law was primarily to ensure that there was no negative discrimination for marriage and for things like state benefits and pensions. All of those problems have gone, and I think that the gender laws, as one could refer to them perhaps, I think these laws are absolutely redundant. We have protections in the Equality Act, and we have equal marriage. The whole concept of people changing legal gender to protect themselves from negative discrimination is protected in other areas. The law it's redundant, and also it's bad law because what it does is it forces people to pretend something that's not true, and I don't think you can force a population to believe something that's not true. It never ends well.
Well, thank you so much, Miranda Yardley, human rights activist.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sharing her thoughts on the Scottish move to fast-track the Gender Recognition Act, and we've covered this a lot at GBNews.
Well, it's a bit of common sense, isn't it? It's quite nice, actually. It's quite refreshing in this day and age. But anyway, so to the latest on the ongoing cost of living crisis now and how we're coping with it, so moving away from that particular issue, it's Sue Ashcombe-Hurt, who's a working pensioner, apparently, from Cheshire, and a big GB News fan, apparently. There we go. Hey, that's nice to know, isn't it?
Yes, our national reporter Paul Hawkins went to see how the big squeeze is changing her life.
The criticism directed at Justin Trudeau is coming from the political left.
Energy prices is the most worrying thing of all, really.
Sue is 70 years young.
I don't put the heating on, and I don't heat the water. I don't have baths anymore. I just have showers.
She's a working pensioner, but the cost of living has got her worried.
I try not to use a lot of water when you're washing up, you just do each cup and saucer and plate as it goes, and you don't fill the bowl with water, that sort of thing.
She's lived in this house by herself for 47 years.
Got my thermals on and my cardi, and then obviously when I'm sitting watching TV, I'm wrapped in my fleece. When I go to bed, take my hot water bottle, and I've got a good duvet, so that keeps me warm. And I started going to bed earlier now because it's warmer in bed than it is downstairs.
Every single year, and all of it is...
And I say I only use the cooker once a day.
To cook one meal a day?
Cook one meal a day. I mean, I used to go shopping every Thursday, but now I only go shopping when I need something, which I walk to, don't take the car. I buy things like a bag of steam vegetables because for one person they're quite good because you get 4 for about £1, so that's 4 meals for £1. But I have noticed I had got some bags of mixed veg and I can get 5 out of that. Rather than getting stuff in and then having a look and think, oh, what do I feel like tonight? You sort of think, right, I'm going to buy this and this is what I'm going to eat this week, regardless of what I fancy and what I don't fancy. But I can't buy the odd bit of chocolate and stuff like that. That's out the window. Well, it makes you feel as though you're not really living, You're just living from one day to the next and hoping in a few months it'll be better. Because somebody will do something about it.
But Rishi Sunak has announced certain schemes that can help out, rebate through council tax, through a loan through your energy bill.
Yeah, but you've got to pay it back. And at the moment, how do you know that in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years we're going to be any better off to be able to afford to pay it back? They're not a low-tax Conservative government.
How do you feel when they tell you they are?
I just laugh because You know, what planet are you living on? You're certainly not on my planet here in Sandbach.
Well, that was Sue there, and look, I just want to say, if you are watching Sue, as I imagine you are, then obviously, you know, we're all thinking of you, and it was quite distressing to hear all of that, and I do wish you all the best. And it's tragically not an uncommon story. I know it doesn't make it any easier for you, Sue, but you know, I have it every single day here in my inbox about people getting in touch and saying, look, I'm choosing whether or not to eat or heat. I'm choosing, you know, sitting there, like you said there, Sue, with your fleece on, you know, and you know, we shouldn't be in this situation. You work all your life, you work hard all your life, and at the end of it, you know, you have to, you know, you should, at the bare minimum, be able to walk into a Tesco's and decide which chocolate bar you want to buy, you know?
I mean, I think it's just awful, and it does seem that it's getting worse. I mean, I've had so many emails for my energy provider saying my bills are practically going to go up doubly.
Oh, it's nuts.
I had my phone bill tell me that it was going to go up, you know, transport, everything. It's really the big squeeze. Everyone, regardless of if you're, you know, struggling financially more broadly to perhaps having a little bit more money, everyone is feeling it. Everyone is feeling it.
Yeah, and obviously national insurance going up as well, and this, that, and the other, you know. What I'm concerned about is that it removes the incentive. I don't buy into the narrative that a lot of people my age, or roughly about my age, maybe a bit younger as well, say, well, no, I can't afford to buy a house. Yeah, but you go to a rooftop cocktail bar every single evening and spend 10 quid on a mojito.
I have to push back on you on that.
Okay, well, there's a lot of people who waste a lot of money, right? I'm one of them.
No, but I think when you feel like you can't even get on a housing ladder, then why should you not just have a bit of a nice things in your 20s?
And if you'd not so rudely interrupted, that's where I was going with it, right? Which is that you have to maintain that incentive, right? It's all very well and good saying, okay, yeah, you're wasting a bit of money, this, that, and the other. Fine, we all do, but if there's no incentive whatsoever, if it seems absolutely impossible that you would ever be able to put down deposits, then you're right. Well, people stop caring about it. What's the point?
And you know, the Ukraine conflict undoubtedly has all of our attention. You know, mine and I think most people right now. But we cannot also forget the challenges, the really difficult challenges that we are actually experiencing in the UK domestically as well. So I think that's really important to remember that.
Let us know your stories as well. Obviously, that was Sue there. She is a GB News viewer and obviously very kindly allowed us to go around and interview her. And well done, Paul Hawkins, as well, of course, our reporter, for sorting all of that out. But get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Let us know how this is affecting you. Is it affecting you? You know, it's the big squeeze. It's the big squeeze.
Well, money-saving expert Martin Lewis tweeted last night that while economic sanctions on Ukraine are likely to make the cost of living crisis worse, the problems predate the war. Justin Urquhart-Stewart is the co-founder of Regionality and joins us now. Justin, I mean, I don't know if you saw Paul Hawkins' report there, but you know, Sue is an example of the real lives that are being affected by the cost of living crisis, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. And as the money-saving expert said, we can't let the situation in Ukraine make us think that this is solely because of that. This is a long-standing issue that's seemingly getting worse.
It's a very long-standing issue, and it's not just a matter of the fuel prices going up or what's happening in Ukraine with grain prices and things like that. There's one fundamental issue here. We've been so bad at it in this country is we have never educated ourselves about how much money we need for our retirement. There is Sue. She's at the wrong end of her life to be able to do anything about this. We should be actually preparing ourselves to say, right, what sort of money do I need to be able to retire on? How much my assets do I going to have? How much do I going to have to put aside? Of course, it's all going to be a guess to a certain extent. But you can make a reasonable guess because it also depends what happens with inflation. But, you know, obviously the cost of fuel and other things will go up. But most people have no idea in terms of their future planning. You're going to be retiring at 66, 67, 68, 69, 70. You could then be living another 20, 25 years. And, of course, that life doesn't necessarily get any cheaper because you'll be paying more on, say, drugs and things like that and healthcare and all those other bits and pieces. And I'm afraid that doesn't go on the normal inflation levels as you see from the government every month. So I'm afraid there's no easy answer to this, but for the future, we have to educate the next generation. Have your mojitos now, but make sure you put enough aside so you can actually make sure you can have some frozen peas when you retire.
But Justin, that's about retirement. The cost of living crisis is being felt on all of us, regardless of retirement. I just mentioned, you know, energy bills and travel and, you know, everything seems to be going up. So this is something that's affecting all of us in many different ways.
Yeah, and you only have to say that awful news coming out of Ukraine at the moment. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe in terms of sunflower oil, wheat, barley. Huge amounts comes out of Ukraine and Russia. They've had very bad harvests the past couple of years. That's the global warming issue, not a war issue, but the war will have an impact this year. Canada and America similarly had bad harvests. That has pushed the price up a lot and hasn't really fed through yet. So I'm afraid there is going to be more of this to come. So, no, I'm afraid there's very little actually governments can do. They can actually try and sit there and say they can give loans and things, but as Sue said, that's a loan, I'm going to pay it back somehow. That doesn't really help very much. It comes down to the basic level of pension that she's going to be on, and is that actually affordable? And unfortunately, what's happening at the moment, inflation, which we've had relatively low for a period of time, is now actually picking up speed and becoming much more embedded. So when people say inflation's running at 5 to 7%, well, input inflation into manufacturing is running at 10 to 15%. That'll still mean we're paying for sort of 7-odd%. We've been used to be paying, what, 2-3%, something like that. And of course, that doesn't really, I'm afraid, reflect what's life like for Sue.
Do young people need to let go of the idea of home ownership?
No, it's what happens is you're going to have to change the way in which you go about it. You're going to have to think, I'm afraid, whether you like your family or not, actually think about actually having families coordinating across the generations. Doesn't matter what you think of your grannies or parents and things like that. Families are going to have to coordinate themselves. But also remember, go back to our parents, certainly in London, and it's something that got forgotten about. We tend to think we're a nation of homeowners. Actually, in the 50s, we weren't. We were a nation, actually, of people who rented, but we didn't rent short-term. A lot of people had longer-term rents. So you actually had rents for the rest of your life. So you didn't have to necessarily actually put all that money aside for a mortgage. You paid rent, but the rent money was lower than the mortgage would have been. But you didn't have to have this fixation that you had to buy a property the whole time because property always goes up. Well, it doesn't always go up. And you can find yourself actually with this thing around your neck, just paying this mortgage off for the rest of your life. And then when you get around to retaring, well, now you haven't got enough cash to live on. So I think there are some more reforms to be done here to think about other forms of ownership we can have. Family ownership, longer-term lease ownership, and maybe it's lease for your lifetime.
All right, Justin. Thank you very much. Justin Urquhart-Stewart there, of course, a regular on GB News, co-founder of Regionality as well. Thank you very much, and indeed an economic expert. How do you feel about the cost of living? Are you feeling the pinch? I've had a lot of views coming in on this. We'll go to those shortly. A variety of different people. Some people are saying, look, you just need to live better, and other people are saying, yes, it is nuts.
Yes, I mean, when it comes to housing, I don't want to individualise the problem. This is a society-wide crisis, and individual young people maybe talking to their family is not going to solve what is a national cost of living crisis.
No, absolutely. Well, look, keep your thoughts coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We'll be back with more of today's top stories after this break.
Hello. Big contrasts with the weather this Friday. A fairly dull, dismal day across much of the east. Whereas in the west, well, there are 1 or 2 showers, but many places dry and bright with some spring sunshine, thanks to this little ridge of high pressure. This weather front, though, has been with us for a few days now, and it's just ground to a halt across these eastern parts of England, bringing thick cloud, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the day. Parts of eastern Scotland also being affected. Parts of East Anglia still largely dry, and we could reach double figures in Norwich with a bit of brightness, but stuck under this rain band from Newcastle to Hull. Temperatures really only 5, 6, 7 at best. Further west, a few showers for Wales and southwest England, but many places dry and bright, and temperatures 8, 9, 10 Celsius. Through this evening, we'll keep a few showers in the west, and we'll keep that wet weather across the east, although it should start to peter out across the far northeast of England. Staying fairly soggy, though, across East Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and rain on and off across southeast England and East Anglia for most of the night. Keeping the temperatures up here, but with clearer skies further west, a frost likely, certainly for Scotland, Northern Ireland, a fairly widespread frost to start the weekend, but should be some cracking sunshine here on Saturday. Now, yesterday we thought this rain may be a little further north, but now it looks like it will be mostly across these eastern parts of England, south of Lincolnshire into the East Midlands. A dull, damp day here on Saturday. Brighter skies for Wales and southwest England, some sunshine likely here, and as I said, a fine day for Scotland and Northern Ireland. After that, early frost temperatures picking up to 8 or 9 degrees, but it's quite a bit colder than that, stuck under that thick cloud, rain and drizzle, which will persist across these eastern parts of England, and easterly winds starting to pick up as well. That will eventually start to chase the rain away during Saturday night and into Sunday. Just a few showers on Sunday, but many places dry with a fair bit of cloud across England and Wales and a cold easterly wind blowing.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Yes, good morning, everybody. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Falarin Imam. We're on your TV, radio, and online as well. And we're here all the way through until midday. We've got loads for you.
Make sure that you get in touch with your views. As usual, do be views at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those all throughout the show. But first, here's the latest news.
Good morning, it's 1 minute past 11. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says Russia's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine is directly threatening the safety of all of Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, the largest in Europe, caught fire after it was attacked by Russian forces overnight. The blaze has since been put out. Downing Street has called the situation gravely concerning. Boris Johnson's vowed to seek an emergency UN Security Council meeting in a bid for a ceasefire. Well, earlier, Ukrainian authorities confirmed Russia has now taken control of the power plant. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the Kremlin of nuclear terror.
If there is a nuclear explosion, this will be the end of everybody, the end of Europe. This will mean the evacuation of the whole of Europe. Only immediate action from Europe can stop the Russian troops. Don't let Europe die in a nuclear catastrophe.
Volodymyr Zelensky there, speaking at the organisation's headquarters in Vienna. Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, confirmed there were no radiation leaks.
It's important to say that all the safety systems of the 6 reactors at the plant were not affected at all, and that there has been no release of radioactive material. The systems we have to measure the radiation are fully functional as well.
The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine. That as an intensive day of diplomacy begins in Europe. Liz Truss is attending a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels today. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO's a defensive alliance and warns it won't hesitate to defend its borders.
Russia has shattered peace on the European continent. It has engaged in a war of a scale of a type not seen in Europe since the Second World War.
Earlier, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said Vladimir Putin's at risk of ending up in prison for alleged war crimes carried out by his Russian forces in Ukraine. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says anyone who's committed offences must be brought to justice.
From what I've already seen, it seems to me there's evidence of war crimes, and it's very important that all of those responsible are held to account, including Putin. I'm very pleased that the prosecutor has already opened an investigation, and what's really important now is the gathering of evidence to make sure that the most powerful case can be brought whenever it can be brought.
Sir Keir Starmer there. Russian troops are now advancing on the city of Mykolaiv near the Black Sea between Odessa and Kherson. That's according to its mayor. A Ukrainian presidential advisor, though, says they've managed to drive the troops back. Meanwhile, authorities in Mariupol, also in the south, say it remains under constant attack and residential areas are being shelled. In the capital, Kyiv, residents and volunteers are creating metal anti-tank barriers known as hedgehogs in a bid to slow Russia's advances. Yulia Gritsenko, one of the many forced to flee the capital, says Ukrainians are fighting for Europe's future.
I'm really proud of all my people, of all Ukrainians who are now fighting for our freedom, for our right to live in a democratic country, to protect Europe from, from the global war which is happening right now in my country. And I just hope that my child will grow up here in Ukraine and we will be free from Russia.
The Home Secretary is visiting Poland later to meet Ukrainians seeking to flee to the UK. Priti Patel is expected to launch the Ukraine Family Scheme, allowing Brits and those settled in the UK to bring their relatives over to join them. We'll be bringing you the latest as we get it. In other news, Paulette Hamilton has won the Birmingham Erdington by-election, holding the Labour seat. A nurse of 25 years, Ms Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency. In her victory speech, she expressed her admiration for the work done by her predecessor, Jack Dromey, who died in January. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick and Anaya and to the point.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flower Inman, and Patrick Christys on your TV, radio and online. We've got a show lined up that is big with all of the top stories that you care about, so here's what's on the menu.
Well, as always, we can't get rid of this guy. Our security editor Mark White will be bringing us the latest from Ukraine, but we'll also be asking a former military and intelligence officer as well whether he thinks we need to be fighting Russian misinformation as well as Russian guns.
Yes, and as Russia continues to be hit with harder economic sanctions, we ask, are our gas bills going to increase as a result? Our national reporter Paul Hawkins investigates the impact of rising cost of living on some of our viewers.
Yes, indeed. And we go over the Erdington by-election result as well with Sunday Mirror's political editor Nigel Nelson. Birmingham now has its first black MP in Labour's Paulette Hamilton. I know we were talking about whether or not we should refer to her as an MP, really. I don't see why we have to identify as that. But anyway, but with a low voter turnout of just 27%, do enough people care?
Yes, we have all of that coming up and much more across the programme. So as usual, make sure that you get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Well, Ukrainian authorities say Russian forces have seized the largest nuclear plant in Europe. A fire broke out at the Zaporizhzhia.
You know what? That's actually not a bad effort because that is impossible to pronounce.
Well, the nuclear power complex in southeastern Ukraine earlier this morning amid heavy shelling in the area by Russian forces.
Well, nuclear regulators and government bodies in Ukraine and the United States say radiation levels appear normal, which is good, of course. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the attack could have caused 6 Chernobyls and urged European leaders to wake up now and stop Russian forces before it becomes a nuclear disaster. Well, look, let's get the latest from our very own security editor, Mark White. Now, Mark, thank you very much for popping back into the studio. Now, there's been obviously widespread condemnation of the attack at this nuclear power plant. So firstly, maybe you could tell us how to pronounce it.
Zaporizhzhia is my stab at it,
Right.
so Zaporizhzhia.
Well, it's better than what we did.
Something like that.
So, look, what's actually happened?
So it was an armed move on this nuclear power station overnight, missile strikes, shelling and attacks on the ground by Russian forces. They are now in control, we understand, of what is Europe's biggest nuclear power station. It supplies a quarter of Ukraine's total power supplies, electricity supplies. And the real concern has been, of course, was this going to potentially strike one of the reactors and lead to a radioactive meltdown. That was always a concern. Ukraine is the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, where they're still suffering from the effects today. That site remains sealed off, and the teams, the inspectors, are on site dealing with the sort of the decontamination of that site. That, of course, was the scene of fighting last week as the Russians were trying not to take this power station, the wreckage of the Chernobyl power station, highly radioactive as it is, but the area around it, because it was a direct corridor down to the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. And Zaporizhzhia as well, it is also in a strategically placed area just south of the city of Dnipro, where there has been some fierce fighting in and around that area of recent days as well. And of course, you control that power station, then you control power supplies.
Yeah, indeed.
As for elsewhere, the Russian advances, it seems that they're slowly but surely encircling most of Ukraine's main cities.
Yes, this is the tactic of the Russians. It was we've seen it before in Chechnya. We've seen it in Syria, where cities are surrounded by overwhelming forces, and slowly but surely they are strangled in terms of their electricity supplies, their water supplies, their food supplies, and they're shelled and pummeled by missile strikes until the populations of these areas capitulate. Kharkiv, up in the northeast of Ukraine, is the second largest city, 1.5 million people. It has been under fierce bombardment in recent days. The mayor and other local officials there saying it hardly a residential area in the city hasn't been targeted. In Mariupol, down in the south, on the Sea of Azov, it again is surrounded. All of the supplies that count have been cut off. They're, fighting and launching a fierce resistance. It's still under Ukrainian control. Quite why or how they're managing to hold out against overwhelming forces, I don't know. Also, Kherson, which is just north of Crimea, now we believe has fallen to the Russian forces.
OK, and obviously there's this massive 40-mile-long Russian military column that's heading for the capital, Kiev. Just what's the latest on that one? And also, sorry to deviate slightly potentially, but a lot of people are wondering, right? Well, why can't they attack this thing with, if they're in a line or something? Why can't we attack this thing with drones or something? How come we're letting it roll into Kiev essentially?
Well, Russia has overwhelming air superiority. There are a few air assets up for the Ukrainians. Some Turkish-supplied drones have been up, and they have managed to take out several Russian vehicles and convoys in recent days. They are being attacked. This convoy is being attacked by troops on the ground with British and US-supplied Stinger missiles and anti-tank missiles. They've been really effective in taking out Russian tanks and armoured personnel carriers, fuel-carrying vehicles and the like. But this 40-mile-long convoy has stalled a bit. It's the intelligence analysis in the UK believes that it's partly due to logistical issues, not getting fuel, ammunition, food supplies to them, and because of the fierce resistance that the Ukrainians are offering. As they work their way down, there is fierce fighting around some of the centres of population heading towards the capital, Kiev. So Bodoryanka is one town which has been under intense bombardment in recent days. There was drone footage that came out yesterday showing a scene that is very reminiscent of the scenes that came out from Aleppo in Syria, where you saw apartment blocks and other buildings that were had been shelled and hit by missiles, and those apartment blocks reduced to rubble, others on fire, the streets littered with burnt-out vehicles and the like. It is a horrific scene. Luckily, I think, you know, some of the worst areas of fighting, a lot of the population have managed to flee, but there's still a lot of people in there as well.
Mark, thank you very much. As always, cheers for keeping us all updated on the very latest. Mark White, our security editor, just filling you in now on what's going on right now in Ukraine. Now, Russian disinformation, apparently, forms a sort of online front, really, and hacker groups like Anonymous are trying to fight it. But should more internet vigilantes join the effort? Mike Zapp, former soldier and intelligence officer, joins us now. Thank you very much. Can I just ask, is there actually a Russian propaganda campaign taking place in this country? Because every single time I go on Twitter, all I see is the Ukrainian stuff. Indeed, yesterday, actually, although I'm sure there was no kind of malicious intent whatsoever in this from the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, but they did decide to put up a picture of a fighter jet that actually was not a Russian fighter jet and that hadn't been shot down. I believe it actually crashed at an air show in Saudi Arabia in 2013, I think. So there is misinformation happening on both sides, isn't there?
Well, I think the Russians are well versed in this, aren't they? And it comes from Vladimir Putin's background as a KGB officer. He knows full well that misinformation can be really powerful, especially when fighting a war. And we know that they've got troll factories set up to do precisely that. Now, for me, you know, I've served in the British military and as a Crown servant, and I'm 100% confident telling you that British values are well and truly alive. We're based on democracy, respect and tolerance, liberty, and the rule of law. But the question for many people, understandably, is who do we believe? You know, in the modern age, we have access to all sorts of information from Twitter, all over the internet. And it can be tricky to decide who's telling the truth here. And I do sympathise with that. But I believe strongly that we have to ask ourselves, who is more likely telling the truth here? Is it the West or Western nations who, you know, elect... Go on.
Well, we hope that, you know, when it comes to journalists on the ground, they'll just be providing, you know, the information as it happens, not necessarily going, you know, trying to take sides necessarily. But just on the question, I think obviously information warfare has been a significant aspect of the conflict going forward. But do you think that perhaps some people are less trusting? Because, for example, during Brexit, it was claimed that this was all Russian bots that were promoting Brexit, and then, you know, similar thing happened with the Trump campaign. It was said that, you know, this was all the Russians that were, you know, promoting Trump. Do you not think that pre-existing narrative may have made people a bit more weary of information from what was happening?
It's definitely had an impact. You know, there was lies on the side of buses, and unfortunately, I have to say, the Conservative government at times has undermined British values. But I have to say, you know, if you're deciding who to believe, is it the nations that democratically elect their leaders every 4 and 5 years? Is it the nations that respect human rights, that strive for equality and allow freedom of speech? Or do you believe a dictator who's manipulated and crooked his way to power, who jails and beats protesters and poisons opposition figures? So, you know, for me, it's an easy solution. And it's important as the public that we call it out when we hear it.
Look, I agree with you completely. I wouldn't trust Putin as far as I could throw him, and can't throw him very far. So there is that. But at the moment, I'm not sure I really feel like I'm being lied to about what's going on in Ukraine. We can see it all, can't we? It's on Twitter. I know so not everything on Twitter you can believe. Of course, in Turkey, talking videos from the ground, you know, various news sources, of course, like that. I mean, what is Putin trying to lie to us about? He's invaded. He wants Ukraine. That's that, isn't it?
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the reports coming out of Russia on RT News, for example, where he calls the leader a Nazi, he's Jewish. It's offensive, and it's that sort of broadcasting that unfortunately is coming into our homes, and some people will believe, if they don't apply the formula that I've just spoken about, as to who best to believe. And I strongly feel that when we see it, when we see that propaganda, we must call it out politely and within, British values, of course. But we can't let them spew this rubbish into our homes.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase "the fog of war," describes the fact that oftentimes in these conflicts it's very difficult to discern all the information at hand. But what do you think about those that have said that we should be banning Russia Today, and things like that? Because some people might say, actually, well, we need to make sure that we maintain our liberal values of allowing different discussions and disagreements. And, even I was looking at the homepage, and it was quite interesting that there was some thing. It was a good insight to see the perspective of how they're coming from. Even if I don't agree with it, it's always good to have more information, surely not less. But do you think actually it's a good thing to ban Russia Today in order to prevent pro-Russian perspectives?
Well, it's actually come off of Freesat, Sky and Freeview already, but that's because of an EU ruling, and those broadcasts come from Luxembourg and France. My personal view is that it should be banned here because it's completely unbalanced. But that's not for me to decide, and it's not for politicians to decide. That's for Ofcom to decide. And they are currently investigating 27 potential breaches, and hopefully they'll come to the right conclusion. But something on Russian state TV, is that their offices are right next to the MI5 headquarters in Thames House. And that, for me, is another worry for security.
Well, I can understand that completely, yes, and it is a concern. Mike, thank you very much. Mike's out there, former soldier and intelligence officer as well, just talking about the, I suppose, Russian quotes and quotes propaganda machine.
Yeah, I mean, one of my friends was observing the RT homepage and said that they learned a lot, actually, of what kind of narratives are being spinned in order to justify what is going on. And I think that that's actually very useful from a kind of intelligence and society perspective to understand or see the motivations to help us discern better, what the appropriate response is. I think that isn't better, more information?
Your enemy,
yeah, exactly. Isn't knowing your enemy a good thing? I mean, but I think there is also a strong case that actually we should just cut off their propaganda machine as a whole.
Look, I think, if you turn on a TV channel called Russia Today, you know what you're getting regarding Russia, right? And so I don't see what the problem is, really. Watch it if you want to watch it. Don't watch it if you don't want to watch it. Don't always believe what you hear. Don't always believe what you see. Take it for what it is. So I'm quite anti-banning stuff, but, there's probably a reason for that.
Yeah, I think that what I was saying, that actually, do we want to get into the situation as a liberal society where we're just banning things that we disagree with?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, but anyway. Coming up, we'll be discussing the results of the Birmingham Erdington by-election, so make sure you stay tuned for that.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis, and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Yes, morning everybody. Right now, last night, Labour held the seat of Erdington after a by-election that was triggered by the tragic sudden death of Jack Dromey. The Labour Party had put forward NHS nurse of 25 years, Paulette Hamilton, who won with 55% of the vote and a majority of 3,622 votes. She is also, for what it's worth, Birmingham's first black MP.
It's just a very strange thing to say, in my view. But anyway, Nigel Nelson is the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and Sunday People and joins us now. Nigel, I mean, am I being pedantic? You know, we're all saying the first black MP. I just think she's an MP. You know, congratulations. There's many black MPs, but, you know, we're putting her race forward as the most important thing. I know it's a side note, but I wanted to know your thoughts. Do you think I'm being a bit pedantic?
No, I agree with you entirely that the important thing is that she's an MP. And as far as the Labour Party is concerned, it's a good result for them because it looks as if they might be denting the red wall that turned blue in 2019. I mean, she's obviously very proud herself of being the first black woman MP in the constituency. But I agree with you. It's a bit of a sideline that. The important thing is that she's made it to Parliament.
And should Labour take this, or they held this seat already for a very long time, the voter turnout was 27%. I mean, should they still take this as a big victory, or should they caution seeing this as a way to extrapolate it, that they're, you know, winning more broadly?
I think that it's the voter turnout of 27%, which is the key here. What that seems to show is that people are generally pretty turned off by politics and politicians at the moment. So it is a bit of a rubbish turnout. I mean, in fairness to Paulette Hamilton, she did get a similar number of votes to Jack Dromey in 2019. So she can be quite pleased with that. And obviously the fact her vote share has gone up by more than 5 points, that's actually good stuff too. But no, I mean, I think that the mere fact that people just couldn't be bothered to come out and vote says something about the state of our politics at the moment.
OK. Well, look, what do we know about her? So she worked in the NHS for however many years. Well, you know, what's she like as a person? Give us some facts.
Well, I know that she's a mother of 5, that she was a former nurse. I've yet to meet her, so I'm looking forward to meeting her next week when she turns up in the House of Commons to take her seat. So I think that at the moment she's a bit of an unknown quantity. Obviously, she's got a tough act to follow in Jack Dromey. I mean, Jack was an old friend of mine going way back. We've known each other since the 1970s. So she's got that. She's got big shoes to fill. But I think that Labour can certainly be pleased that, given that the Tories threw quite a lot at this seat, that they've managed to actually increase their vote share and got their MP back. I mean, it should be a safe Labour seat, but the number of votes has been going down pretty steadily over the last few years.
And I mean, in terms of the Conservative Party, I mean, how should they take this? I mean, have they just seen it as something not to bother? I mean, he got 37%. That's not bad. I mean, how do you think they should take this result?
Well, again, we're back to the voter turnout thing. I think that the key thing is that why voters don't actually want to go along to the polling station. And of course, other things have taken over completely from Partygate, but I don't think that that's gone away. There is this disillusion with the Tory leadership. Not only are Tory MPs themselves disillusioned, but the whole electorate is. And we really need to get the whole business of the number 10 parties sorted out. Now, I think that at the moment Boris Johnson is safe, that there are far bigger issues with Ukraine going on to start changing the leader at this moment. But he'll always have that hanging over him. So, again, we'll see how Tory MPs react once the Metropolitan Police have come back and said whether Boris Johnson will get fined.
I don't think anyone cares. I don't think anyone cares, really. I think that maybe they did for a while. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. And by the way, I think if they do care, I think I've got to be honest with you, I think they're wrong, right? I can completely see why there was the initial outrage and outcry. I think this is a Westminster bubble story.
I totally disagree. You know, I think we need to actually be bringing it, you know, back to the fore.
So we change leader now?
Not right at this moment, obviously, but I do think that he still has massively unanswered questions. And I said...
Well, does Kay Burley go then as well?
We've had a cost of living crisis that is getting worse. We can't let, you know, our Prime Minister not be held accountable for these failings over the last couple of years.
Oh, the cost of living stuff, yeah, absolutely. The cheese and wine stuff, I can care less about. But anyway, yes. Oh, well, there we go. Right, so anyway, so that's my view, clearly. Just talk to me a bit about Gavin Williamson. Sir, arise, Sir Gavin.
Well, it's a very odd timing for a start, on the basis that you'd normally expect something like this to pop up in one of the Queen's honours. So why they've decided to actually give Gavin Williamson a knighthood now is a bit of a mystery. Of course, there is a suspicion that it's to keep him quiet so he doesn't interfere too much in Partygate, which we've just been talking about. But when it comes down to his record, that Gavin Williamson was a very good chief whip. Very clever at that job, less successful when he became a departmental minister. So he's been fired from 2 jobs. He was fired by Theresa May from being Defence Secretary, and again dropped in the September reshuffle by Boris Johnson last year after the mess up he'd made of schools. We had the free school meals debacle, we had the fiasco over exams, all of which Gavin Williamson presided over. So it's a strange kind of honour for failure. However, the rumour in the House of Commons is that he's quite keen to support Liz Truss as the next leader of the Conservative Party. So this may be a way of number 10 trying to dissuade him from doing that.
Well, thank you so much.
It's a bit of inside info as well. Good.
Thank you, Nigel Nelson, political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People. Thank you for joining us this morning. After the break, the cost of living crisis in the spotlight. But first, can't speak.
That's all right. Here's the headlines.
It's 11:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says Russia's shelling of a nuclear power station in Ukraine is directly threatening the safety of all of Europe. The Zaporizhzhia power plant, the largest in Europe, caught fire after it was attacked by Russian forces overnight. The blaze has since been put out, and the head of the UN's atomic watchdog says there's been no release of radioactive material. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the Russian people to take action against their government.
Russian people, I want to appeal to you. How is this possible? After all, we fought together in 1986 against the consequences of the Chernobyl catastrophe. How could you ever forget about it? If you did not forget, then you must not keep silent. You must tell your authorities. Go out on the streets and say that you want to live on the land without radioactive contamination. Radiation does not know where Russia is.
Russian troops are now advancing on the city of Mykolaiv near the Black Sea between Odessa and Kherson. That's according to its mayor. A Ukrainian presidential advisor, though, says they've managed to drive the troops back. Meanwhile, authorities in Mariupol, also in the south, say it remains under constant attack and residential areas are being shelled. In the capital, Kyiv, residents and volunteers are creating metal anti-tank barriers known as hedgehogs in a bid to slow Russia's advances. The Foreign Secretary says allies are prepared to tighten the vice around Putin's war machine. That as an intensive day of diplomacy begins in Europe. Liz Truss will attend a series of meetings with G7 leaders and EU ministers at NATO's headquarters in Brussels. One topic on the agenda will be cutting Europe's dependency on Russian oil and gas. And in other news, Paulette Hamilton has won the Birmingham Erdington by-election, holding the Labour seat. A nurse of 25 years, Ms Hamilton becomes the first black MP to represent a Birmingham constituency. And that's it from us. We'll be back in just under half an hour. After the break, it's back to Patrick and Inaya and To The Point.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 11:36. This is To The Point with me, Patrick Christys, and Inaya Iman on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Well, yes, let's get the latest from our GB News security editor, Mark White. Thank you for joining us again in the studio, Mark. There's been widespread condemnation of the attack on the nuclear power plant. They surely weren't deliberately trying to target the reactors, were they?
Well, we don't think that they would have been. Sanity would suggest that you would not be going after nuclear power plants' reactors, because that's going to cause a nuclear disaster and nuclear fallout on neighbouring countries. And of course, what's the neighbouring country to Ukraine but Russia? So they're going to be affected by any of that. I think we're trying to capture the area around this power station. I should say we've just got some information through from the Ukrainian military. They put out their estimates of the number of casualties that they have managed to inflict on the Russian authorities. Bear with me while I read out some of this. They say that approximately 9,166 Well, that seems exact rather than approximate, but this is Russian troops have been killed in the conflict. Now, we have no way of independently verifying this. Russia does acknowledge that forces have been lost. And in fact, Vladimir Putin just yesterday stood to attention to honour the Russian troops who died so far in his invasion. But the official number that the Russians are putting it at so far is just under 500. Still very significant losses. And I'm sure maybe the generals were calculating, but would they have been calculating that number? And they certainly wouldn't have been calculating more than 9,000. But again, as I say, this is being... a number is being put out by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defence, so we have to caveat that and attribute whatever information is coming from them. They also say, in terms of the losses or strikes that they have inflicted on the Russian vehicles and equipment, they say at least 251 tanks have been taken out, 33 aircraft, 404 vehicles and 105 artillery systems. Now, people might raise an eyebrow and think that that just sounds like Russia is getting a complete and utter pummeling. I think the UK Ministry of Defence are quite useful for us on this because they have been carrying out their own analysis of the situation on the ground. They have their own intelligence assets in that region. They have satellite imagery. They are speaking to their colleagues in the Ukrainian ministry as well. And they do acknowledge that there have been significant Russian losses, but quite, I think, understandably and sensibly, the UK Ministry of Defence are not putting numbers on it. Quite staggeringly high numbers that the Ukrainians are claiming, but as I say, you know, that's their claim.
You know, and this is what we did before. We did that section before, didn't we? And it was focused on, you know, Russian propaganda. It's all propaganda, isn't it? It's a war, right? So on both sides, it's a war.
It is an information war, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think the Russians are up for this, the actual soldiers? Because again, yet again, you can't verify all these videos that you see on Twitter. These people could be anyone pretending to call their mothers or whatever. But you do see videos of what are reported to be, Russian soldiers saying, we didn't really know what we were doing here. We were just told to come in. We were told there were going to be flowers laid down in the streets for us, and it's not the case, is it?
Well, this is claims not just coming from the Ukrainian military, but there are journalists on the ground who claim to have spoken to Russian soldiers that have been captured as well, and they have heard those stories coming from them, that they were told by their commanders that they were here to exercise. Well, they were, for quite a few months, exercising on the eastern borders of Ukraine and up in Belarus as well. So that part, I guess, from their commanders is true.
Could they just be saying that? That's the thing, because it does seem unlikely that, given the annexation of Crimea and his long-standing engagement with eastern Ukraine, that it would have just been an accident that they were there.
Yeah, just wander into Ukraine for me, please.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, they were exercising was the sort of reason that the Russians gave to the world for having 175,000 troops amassed around three of the main borders of the country of Ukraine. And they were there for months, and they were engaged, because we saw all of the images, in live fire exercises, other training in that area, training alongside their Belarusian counterparts. Now, the Russian troops say that they were told that this was just an exercise. Now, I'm not saying they're all saying that, but there are some reports that some have said they didn't know that actually what they were there for was to invade. But invade they have. They're in that country. And the images that are coming out also are not just images from Ukraine. There are images that have been released by the Russian military, in particular one area of Berdyansk, which is in southeast Ukraine, near the strategic port city of Mariupol. Now, this shows an area, a town of about 110,000, which has now been captured, according to the Russian military, by Russian forces. And they say they have sustained or that Ukrainian forces have sustained very significant casualties. They have taken over this area, of course, as they try to make their gains to further towards the main centres of population.
Can I ask, we do keep hearing a lot from Volodymyr Zelensky, and, I mean, clearly he's a very courageous chap, and it would appear, deeply cares about his country and is in it for the long haul, it would seem. Do you think Russia are just going to try and take him out at some point? Is that what's going to happen, or what do you reckon?
Well, there are reports, certainly quite credible reports, that there have been now 3 assassination attempts on Vladimir Zelensky. He knows he's a marked man. He has said as much, that Vladimir Putin's forces are trying to decapitate him quite literally. So not just him, but also other key officials in and around key cities, strategic cities, and the capital, Kiev, as well. So, they take him out, they take the leadership out. It makes things a lot easier for the Russian military and I guess taking over Ukraine, if that is the end goal of Vladimir Putin and his forces.
Indeed. Yeah, no, I think it's obviously it's a moving situation, of course, isn't it? Do you think it's all coming together a bit for Vladimir Putin now? I mean, of course, there was reports at the start of, he's behind his targets. They've not hit their targets, and reports of discontent with his military commanders, etc. Actually, is he on track? Do you think? For what he was planning, or not?
I think he's behind schedule. I think that is clear to see, and the analysis as well that's coming out from Western governments and intelligence agencies such as the Defence Department in the United States, Defence Intelligence here in the UK, suggest that he is behind and perhaps well behind schedule. But that doesn't mean that he isn't making significant gains, and he has encircled most of the main centres of population now in Ukraine, and in some of these key locations in Kharkiv in the northeast, in Mariupol down in the south, in Kherson. Lots of different big Ukrainian cities are now encircled. All eyes, of course, are also on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, with this big armoured column that has been working now for days, working its way down to Kiev, and it has that city almost encircled. There's still a corridor in there and out of Kiev, but there's Russian forces all around that area now.
Yeah, there's been some reports, again, question of verifying them, but there's been some reports that, for example, crowding and in Russian tubes and things because of a lot of the banking systems being cut off. We now know that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is being halted, and obviously the economic sanctions as well are going to be biting Russia quite significantly. I mean, is there any concerns about what impact that will cause in terms of the stability within Russia if it's really starting to harm the Russian people?
Well, yeah, there is a legitimate question to be asked about just what Russia will be reduced to with this economic stranglehold and political stranglehold that has been placed on Russia by countries all around the world. Now, he still has allies and friends in China and others, to the east mainly. But if you cut off the banking sector, if you blockade the ports effectively by big shipping companies refusing to deal with Russia and take goods in and out of that country, if you then sanction many of their leading figures, Russia becomes a pariah state. It withdraws into itself, becomes potentially much more dangerous in that sense, wounded beast. But also, if it causes the people of Russia to rise up against Vladimir Putin, that, on the face of it, for many Western countries, might seem like the best option. Overthrow the dictator and all is solved. But be careful what you wish for. There is a stable government of sorts, of course, in Moscow at the moment. You overthrow Vladimir Putin, you don't know what you're going to end up with in terms of the new government that takes over that country. This is a nuclear-armed state. Do you want that kind of instability in such a big nuclear armed power.
Very important.
Exactly. Good stuff, Mark. Thank you very much. And just to let you know as well, I think we are expecting a NATO conference, aren't we? At some 12:15.
Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary General of NATO, due to give his daily briefing just to talk about the situation on the borders of these NATO allies. It's been delayed somewhat until about 12:30. Lots of dynamic and fluid movements on the ground, so lots of these press conferences do get knocked on a bit.
Absolutely. Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White there, of course, our security editor, just filling you in yet again on the very latest from Ukraine as the situation continues to progress.
Yeah, and I think Mark's point about, whether or not if there was pressure, within Western societies to remove Putin, what that would actually cause. I mean, David Gorka, former minister, has written an article in the New Statesman saying the West must topple Putin, but it will take patience. That is quite a significant thing to say.
Part of me does wonder, look, we're going a bit off on a tangent here, but part of me does wonder, really, whether or not actually Putin has kind of messed this up in a sense of, before he had his wealth, he had his power. Now, it's all very well and good saying, Bill Gates is a wealthy man or Jeff Bezos is a wealthy man. Yeah, but he's not armed to the teeth and he doesn't own basically most of a continent, as it were. I can't help but wonder now if Putin left himself vulnerable. If this goes wrong, and it may well not go wrong, of course, but if it does, has he left himself vulnerable now?
Oh, but you look at countries like Iran. They are a pariah state, and they are still existing. They have had long-standing economic sanctions. They have long-standing marginalisation on the international stage. But there is a lot of nationalism, really, in those societies and kind of anti-Western hatred. So, a lot of the time, a lot of these countries can keep plodding along, even if they are hugely isolated.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're going to move on from that now. And to the latest on the ongoing cost of living crisis and how you're coping with it. So, Sue Ashcombe-Hurt is a working pensioner from Cheshire, a big GB News fan as well. She got in touch with us, I believe. And our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, actually went to see how the big squeeze is not just affecting her, but I have had, when we come back off this, I've had a lot of you get in touch, gbnews.uk, with your own stories about the cost of living crisis and the fact that you are feeling the big squeeze. But this is Sue's story.
A lot of the criticism directed at Justin Trudeau is coming from the political left.
Energy prices is the most worrying thing of all, really.
Sue is 70 years young.
I don't put the heating on, and I don't heat the water. I don't have baths anymore. I just have showers.
She's a working pensioner, but the cost of living has got her worried.
I try not to use a lot of water when you're washing up, you just do each cup and saucer and plate as it goes, and you don't fill the bowl with water, that sort of thing.
She's lived in this house by herself for 47 years.
Got my thermals on and my cardi. And then obviously when I'm sitting watching TV, I'm wrapped in my fleece. When I go to bed, take my hot water bottle, and I've got a good duvet, so that keeps me warm. And I started going to bed earlier now because it's warmer in bed than it is downstairs.
Every single year, and all of it is...
And I say I only use the cooker once a day.
To cook one meal a day?
Cook one meal a day. I mean, I used to go shopping every Thursday, but now I only go shopping when I need something, which I walk to, don't take the car. I buy things like a bag of steam vegetables because for one person they're quite good because you get 4 for about £1, so that's 4 meals for £1. But I have noticed I had got some bags of mixed veg and I can get 5 out of that. Rather than getting stuff in and then having a look and think, oh, what do I feel like tonight? You sort of think, right, I'm going to buy this and this is what I'm going to eat this week, regardless of what I fancy and what I don't fancy. But I can't buy the odd bit of chocolate and stuff like that. That's out the window. Well, it makes you feel as though you're not really living, You're just living from one day to the next and hoping in a few months it'll be better. Because somebody will do something about it.
But Rishi Sunak has announced certain schemes that can help out, rebate through council tax, through a loan through your energy bill.
Yeah, but you've got to pay it back. And at the moment, how do you know that in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years we're going to be any better off to be able to afford to pay it back? They're not a low-tax Conservative government.
How do you feel when they tell you they are?
I just laugh because... what planet are you living on? You're certainly not on my planet here in Sandbach.
Gosh, yeah. So unfortunately, that's a tragically familiar story for many people. I'm sure many of you watching will have experienced something very similar to Sue. And yet again, Sue, we wish you all the best, and thank you for getting in touch with us. And obviously, thank you for tuning in as well. It says she's a GB News fan, and we wish you all the best.
Absolutely, and thank you, Paul Hawkins, for that really important report.
Absolutely. Lots of you getting in touch on this issue, right? So the cost of living, it's not going away anytime soon. It is clearly a massive, massive problem for a lot of you. Several people getting in touch about this. Go on. You've got
Tony said, I've saved money this winter by having a dry January. Didn't have a shower.
Classic, Tony. Well done, mate. Yeah, it's the third time you've emailed in with that same joke, actually, Tony.
Really?
So, so I see it all the time. No, I'm joking. Thank you very much. Anyway, right, so yes, a lot of you saying, yes, well, you don't understand why... Bridget's been in touch. Thank you very much, Bridget. So she doesn't think it's fair that someone like Sue can work her whole life and then still have to end up scrimping in her... say later years. Sorry, Sue. I don't want to mean you any disrespect when I say that, but yes, that's Bridget's view. There are a couple of people as well, though, just saying, look, you know, we've always had financial difficulties in this country. It kind of ebbs and flows a little bit, and maybe we need to take more personal responsibility. Not referring to Sue in this regard. A bit more responsibility to, I suppose, manage your finances better. I mean, mine are an absolute mess. It won't shock you.
I mean, I think that there does get to a point, though, that it's no amount of, you know, sacrifice and manoeuvring can you do when your bills are just rising exponentially.
Oh, it's bonkers. I mean, again, you know, keep these views coming in, because I think we're going to try and do as much of this as possible, really, just to try and get out and about to you guys and hear your stories, really, because, you know, I think it's a massive problem. And when you're confronted, like you've just said there, with, I think we're not talking about a little bit, you know, bills going up by thousands, right? That's, you know, unless you've got something put away, which, you know, not all of us do, then you're in trouble.
Well, some people saved during the pandemic,
some people
furloughed and all that.
Some people had to move back in with their parents.
Alan has said Labour have no agenda. They're just grasping at straws, trying to keep the so-called Partygate going because they have nothing else to offer.
Well, there
Strong
we go.
words, Alan.
There we go. Right, cost of living. I don't agree about saving for old age. I'm a pensioner. If I save, my pension would be £60 a month, apparently. God. Spend it elsewhere. That's from Pearl. Nice name, Pearl.
Know, some people are saying, you know, live for today. You know, you never know what's going to happen, so you might as well just enjoy it whilst we're here.
Yes, I'm very much a live-in-the-moment kind of guy, and I, as a result, have a terrible relationship with my accountant. But anyway, there we go. Right, that's it from us here on To The Point. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting in touch with us and for tuning in. I will be back later on, by the way, cheeky little plug, Friday Night Feast, 7 till 9 p.m. Tune in. It's going to be absolute chaos, OK? Absolute chaos. I got challenged to, well, I'll reveal all on air. It's an interesting show, put it that way.
And also tune in on Sunday, 3 p.m. for the discussion. So up next is The Briefing with Isabel Oakeshott. Thank you.
Hello. Big contrasts with the weather this Friday. A fairly dull, dismal day across much of the east. Whereas in the west, well, there are one or two showers, but many places dry and bright with some spring sunshine, thanks to this little ridge of high pressure. This weather front, though, has been with us for a few days now, and it's just ground to a halt across these eastern parts of England, bringing thick cloud, rain and drizzle on and off for much of the day. Parts of eastern Scotland also being affected.